Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Harrisburg City Council Legislative Session, Tuesday, November 28, 2017. I'm calling this meeting to order at 6:05 p.m. Mr. Petrosky, please do the roll call.
Mr. Allett?
Present.
Ms. Daniels?
Here.
Ms. Green?
Present.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Madsen?
Here.
Mr. Majors?
Here.
Ms. Williams?
Here. Thank you. Moving on to the invocation. Mr. Majors?
I just ask everyone to have a moment of silence. This past month, we've had several victims of homicide in the city of Harrisburg, and especially during this holiday season, we want to make sure that we keep them, their families, and everyone in our city in our prayers. It's been a very difficult month, so we just want to give a moment of silence for everyone in the city of Harrisburg. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Majors. Moving on to Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Johnson?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Moving on to communications. We will now have the presentation of the proposed 2018 budget by Mayor Eric Pappas.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to say thank you to all members of City Council, as well as all the department heads that have come out tonight, members of the public and the media. Appreciate that, and we have a nice presentation for you. I'll start by just taking you through the general agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about the fact that we have a balanced budget. And again, we are not proposing a tax increase for 2018. We'll go over some of the highlights in terms of revenues and expenditure. We'll talk a little bit about our hiring and where we stand in building critical capacity. We'll focus a bit on debt. That's a significant aspect of this budget. And then we will get into the capital improvements budget, present that publicly, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions and times to follow up as we go through the year end and we have our hearings. So the first slide is a really interesting slide because right off the bat it shows you that between 2017 last year or this year and the budget that we're proposing for next year, we're proposing a spend from the general fund of about $4 million more than we did in 2017. And that is comprised of two things. One, it's including a $2 million debt payment, which is basically a prepayment of debt, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we want to sort of balance looking towards the future and helping to pay down our existing general obligation debt with also investing in capital. But it's also up because our revenues are up. And I want to talk about that, and we'll get into that on the next slide. But our revenues are up by about $2 million over where we projected them to be just as recently as of the year before. We're also going to be investing $6.5 million in capital budget. So when you take that $6.5 million, you add in the $2 million, that's about $8.5 million of our cash, of the money that we've sort of saved over the years through careful budget management, and we're proposing spending that down. It's all a sign that the city is showing increased fiscal health and that we are in a much better and stronger place than we were even a few years ago. So drilling down a little more deeply, if you look at these numbers, I think you'll be impressed. If you look at the property tax number that we anticipated for 2017 versus what we're budgeting for 2018, you'll see that we're anticipating about $800,000 more in property taxes. For the earned income tax, we're anticipating about $600,000 more. And for the LST, we are anticipating about $500,000 more. That's all roughly about $2 million more in revenue. And this means a number of different things. One, it means that more people are investing in their properties in the city. We see the anecdotal evidence of that with the various cranes at Pinnacle or PHFA. We see some of that in our increasing permit fees. And we also see some of that in the confidence that's beginning to build, especially around, say, Harrisburg University, which is looking to invest over $100 million in a major high-rise building project, which I don't think people would have even dreamed of just 2 or 3 years ago. The earned income tax increasing means that people are earning more money in the city of Harrisburg. So that can mean a combination of more jobs and also better paying jobs. And that is a positive trend. And the LST, the fact that that is increasing, basically indicates that more people are paying into the system, all of which tends to indicate that I believe we're starting to see our population begin to increase, and some of the payoff begin to be measurable in terms of a lot of the office conversions that have happened to new residential, a lot of the business growth that we're beginning to see. So this is really, really positive news for the city. It's also positive in the sense of look at what the Strong Plan projected relatively recently for 2018. We're over $3 million up over the Strong Plan projections. And that's to say that I know there was a lot of concern and a lot of fear that maybe the Strong Plan wouldn't work. Well, the Strong Plan has worked and is working, and I think it has to do a lot with the fiscal management of the city. So that's all very, very positive, positive news. If we flip over and we now look at the expenditure highlights, you'll see that things are relatively stable. You see an increase in personnel costs. And I can announce to you here and the public more generally that we have reached an agreement in principle with the firefighters. That agreement still needs to be subject for their vote and for council's improvement, but it includes relatively modest wage increases. There's relatively modest wage increases already negotiated for AFSCME and for police. So that means really for the first time since I've been in office, we'll have solid, stable contracts for all 3 of our unions, and a large part of the personnel increase is based on those contracts. From a healthcare standpoint, this is also a bit of a success story for the city. We're actually anticipating spending a little less money on healthcare, in part due to the new prescription provider we have, Benecard, which basically we adopted last year with the promise of hundreds of thousands of dollars in prescription savings, and we have actually seen that, and we've realized that. And as a result, we feel comfortable not only decreasing our healthcare spend, but also covering more people. And I wanted to state publicly that we have a proposal for next year to start including, once again, members of City Council, elected part-time officials, treasurer, controller, in healthcare benefits. This was something that had been rescinded via executive order during the Thompson administration, but I feel it is appropriate to bring those back now that we're in a more stable fiscal position. Debt service, as you see, is increasing by about $2 million, and that is the extra spending that we are projecting spending on our general obligation debt. The key here is to realize that every dollar that we spend now in paying down our debt, in prepaying a portion of our debt, we are saving 6.75% interest compounded over what could be as long as all the way out till 2032. So it's a major, major savings. That $2 million for next year is hopefully just the start. The only slightly down note in the expenditures is the pension expenses, which do continue to creep upward for the city, and that's something to keep an eye on. All right, let's talk about the employment health at the city of Harrisburg. And one of the things that we're doing in this budget is we are taking 42 different positions across AFSCME, and we are basically giving them grade increases. And we are changing some of the sanitation workers, for instance, to a 40-hour work week to be in line with the rest of our public works employees. Those grade increases basically mean that a lot of positions which otherwise, sort of capped out at a relatively low salary now can grow even higher. And in fact, the budget implications for this year total over $174,000 in essentially grade increases or additional raises for ASME employees across the board, again, mostly in Public Works. In addition to that, we're adding 2 new ASME positions. One, a on-call in-house plumber, and the second being a 3rd park ranger. We made a commitment a few years ago to slowly rebuild our park ranger program. We had one, and then we added another, and this will be our 3rd, and we feel that's really important to the health and safety of our parks, and so those positions are there. All in all, that means, and this is also very good news for the city, we will have created 45 new ASME positions since I took office in 2014. We had 43 that we created over the last 4 years, and 2 more equals 45. Of those, the majority are in Public Works. You can see it there, 32 new positions in Public Works. There's the codes positions, park rangers, 311, et cetera. So not only are we growing our ASME workforce, but we're also giving great increases to people who had not had a chance to progress in their jobs. On the management side of things, we are proposing in this budget 7 new management positions to basically fill out some of our departments which needed additional folks. We'll go into these in detail in a minute, but basically it's 2 administrative assistants, 2 deputies / directors, a new archivist, a part-time investigator for HR, and a financial analyst. As a matter of comparison, from 2014 to 2017, we created 27 new management positions, add the 7 in, and that makes 89 new positions of full-time employment at the part-time investigator, 88 full-time, 1 part-time new positions of full-time employment since 2014. It's another sign that the city is recovering and growing. Okay, we'll look a little bit more closely at some of those positions, and I wanted to start by looking at public safety and to let the public know that it will be a busy year hiring for police and fire. We're looking to hire 5 new firefighters and 20 new police officers. That's really a sort of staggering number for police. We are hopeful. We've really upped our recruitment efforts, and we're making a real effort to see if we can get that number. We're hopeful that we can reach it by the end of the year. That would bring us up finally to full complement, and that number takes into account projected retirements at this time. Remember, we also implemented some new conditions when we approved the union contract for the police. We now have onboarding, and you have to pay back if you leave early. We eliminated a step so that you could accelerate a little faster as a police officer. We think all of that is going to help us in recruitment and making sure that we hit that number. There is a change in the police and fire command staff. And actually, let me start with fire, which is at the bottom. Right now, there are 3 command staff for police and 2 command staff for fire. And we are proposing in this budget adding a 3rd command staff for fire, which would be basically another deputy chief. So you'd have the chief, a senior deputy chief, and a 3rd deputy chief. We feel, and we'll discuss this when we get into the budget hearings, that position is going to allow us to do a lot more and is going to be a very positive thing for the fire department. Similarly, in the police department, we're reorganizing. Right now, we have a chief and 2 captains. We're having a graded system whereby chief is going to change his title to commissioner. Beneath him, Captain Moody will be promoted to deputy chief, and then we will have the captain, 1 captain beneath that. So we've also done something in terms of salary adjustments. We've basically taken that structure and we've equalized it between police and fire. And so the junior deputy for the fire and the captain for police will make 5% more than the highest unionized firefighter or police officer. The senior deputy for fire or deputy chief will make 10% more. And then the chief and commissioner will make 20% more. What that does is not only does it give us parity between police and fire, which I think is a fair way to approach things, but it also puts our police commissioner's salary at $100,000, which is a number we've been trying to slowly get to for the city and we feel is necessary to make us competitive with other heads of the police departments throughout Pennsylvania and actually throughout the country. If you flip over, then these are the other major changes for the city in terms of management, personnel, and salary. One of the issues that we have currently in the Law Bureau is that we are having trouble retaining talent. As you probably know, we lost our deputy and our assistant solicitors over the course of the past year. They've gone on to simply better paying, higher paying jobs. It wasn't because they didn't like working here at the city. We feel in order to be more competitive, we've got to bump up those positions and get them in that $85,000, $75,000 lawyer salary range. I'm told the average starting lawyer salary around here, at least for the Commonwealth and elsewhere, is about $80,000. We need to be able to compete, to be able to have lawyers in our department, and the benefit of a fully staffed law bureau is that everything from workflow to contract management flows more smoothly. That will require a salary ordinance change, and you will see that in the updated salary ordinance that we have, and we can discuss that. We can discuss that further. For the mayor's office, I want to let the public know that as part of a continuing reorganization, the senior advisor position is going to be moving to part-time and is going to have its salary decreased. But I'd like to add an additional secretary position, administrative position to my office to better respond to constituent services and basically to give a little bit more administrative support. I've had trouble maintaining that position, in part because it's a little too much for one person to do, and there needs to be some redundancy built into the office, so that's part of that reorganization. In the Planning Bureau, this is probably our most significant change, management staff-wise. We're looking to double the size of the Planning Bureau. We want to add a deputy director, so that basically, like police and fire, be a sort of tiered system. You'd have the director, a deputy director who would also serve as the zoning officer, and then an urban planner, which would be a junior position. Right now, we've had a problem where we've been burning out our urban planners because it's just too much work for two people in that department. We also want to add an archivist. And I know this is something that City Council has looked for in the past. I think this is very important and also will aid in the eventual transition of all the city archives to the state archives when they complete their new building that's currently underway there on 6th Street. We have to establish an MOU and a transfer and all sorts of things as a part of that, and an archivist can do that. We thought the archivist could also, if we hire the right person, serve as the historic resource specialist for the city, which means that they could also help with our historic districts and with our historic architecture review board, and basically be a resource to the public in that sense. In HR, this is one change that we'd like to do that impacts police. We would like to bring on a civilianized investigator to do background checks for the city. Doesn't need to be a full-time position, but we'd like to not have that done by the police department as it has been done in the past. It should free them up to do, I mean, right now it's being done by assorted detectives. It'll free them up to do more things. And we're looking to have another administrative support added for HR, which is very important just in terms of keeping up with all the voluminous paperwork and issues there. And then finally, a proposed management analyst for finance, which is about building in a little bit of redundancy for the department. Right now, we have a budget manager and a purchasing manager, and we need somebody who can fill in, learn those trades, and support that office more broadly, and that's the proposal there. There are some changes and significant ones that you should be aware of and the public should be aware of, specifically with regard to public works. And although that is does not come out of the general fund, that comes out of the Neighborhood Services Fund, and the Neighborhood Services Fund is about a little more than $19 million. So you have to calculate that, and as when you're looking at the overall budget picture for the city. We have hired a very effective new Parks Maintenance Director who's here with us, and we're recommending splitting that position from the arborist, keeping the arborist, but not having it be the same person. And we've done something for the first time in a long time, which is that we actually worked and provided you with a parks maintenance budget. Ron, who is our Parks Maintenance Director, has done a very good job of sort of maximizing and scheduling and organizing the workload and planning out expenditures for the future. If you recall last year's budget, one of the main initiatives was increasing the parks maintenance staff. So you now see this come to fruition in a budget which you'll be able to review. And we felt that in that department there needed to be significant salary adjustments as well to be competitive and to really be in keeping with surrounding municipalities. They will require a salary ordinance adjustment as well. The city engineer will. And basically, the Public Works Director, the Deputy Director, and the city engineer need to have their salaries adjusted. This would put the city engineer and the Public Works Director earning the same amount and being equal with the Economic Development Director, and basically it's at $90,000. Okay. Turning to debt management, we talked about this a little bit, but I wanted to announce to the public here tonight that the city has selected a financial advisor. And we intend to hire a firm out of Philadelphia called Fairmount Capital. It was the unanimous selection of our review committee. We sent them a letter of intent. They've accepted the offer. We do not have negotiated the contract yet. That has to be put into place, and it will come down to council probably first thing in the new year. You'll get the contract with Fairmount Capital. What Fairmount Capital is going to be able to do is they're going to be able to sit down and negotiate with AMBAC and possibly work out a debt restructuring or a debt repayment plan for the city of Harrisburg. As of now, you know we're going to be not borrowing against AMBAC any longer, and we're going to be spending $2 million more on debt in this budget than was anticipated in the strong plan. That's good and that's important, but with the interest rates of the AMBAC loan being so high, 6.75%, we feel we could certainly restructure it and have a better deal, free up valuable resources, and that's going to be part of a continuing discussion that we'll have with City Council and the public, but the public needs to be aware. I think it is a significant milestone that in this budget we are proposing paying down debt as a part of our overall picture. All right. A large part of this budget is the $11 million or so in capital projects, $6.5 million from the general fund that we are proposing for 2018. And this is going to take some time for you to review and for everybody to understand. I'm only going to go over some highlights here, but we promised you a capital budget, and we've developed one. Now, depending on exactly where we end the year, we think we'll end the year with a cash position of maybe around $20 million. That's money which basically we've saved up over the past several years by underspending our budget. It's not a recurring source of revenue. It is ultimately, we wouldn't anticipate seeing those savings moving forward because hopefully we'll have filled our positions and hired all police officers. But of the $20 million, we're proposing taking $2 million for the debt and $6.5 million for the general fund capital projects. That, we think, is a reasonable spend. It still allows us with a significant amount of money in reserve. And again, some of that money in reserve will have to be used for future capital projects. We'll talk about that. And the rest of that money in reserve may or may not factor into some sort of restructuring with AMBAC. But if we just look at the capital projects and we go back, Bruce, okay, there you are. We'll stick with just some of the highlights. And for police, I wanted to state, we're going to be investing in new vehicles. We're also going to be investing in radios. Those radios are expensive. We had this discussion with City Council before. That's over $1 million in radios and vehicles, and that's not even all the radios, but it's a major cost and upgrade for the city. We also need to allocate more money for the 15th Street substation. This is something that we can get into detail in the committee hearings. There was CDBG money already allocated for that station. Originally, the plan was a gut and renovation. Now the plan is new construction, and those costs are now at a total of about $1 million. So it's a significant investment on the part of the city, and something that we'll share the plans with you and have the conversation with you as we move forward. For the fire, you see we're investing over $1 million in roofs. You've got to start with roofs if you are if you're working on upgrading the infrastructure. In subsequent years, we'd look to do other repairs for our stations, but that's a major spend. If you flip over to IT, I won't highlight anything there other than the first step of any eventual migration off the mainframe has to do with creating redundancy for the data center. That is being planned for next year. In community and economic development, you'll see two things. You'll see, one, we need to allocate more money for the 5-site development for our playgrounds. That has been something that the costs have increased as we've developed those plans even further and put them out to bid. We also want to begin funding the Reservoir Park Master Plan. The proposal is to start with the relatively inexpensive costs of the meadow planning and maybe some of the circulation enhancements, but begin doing that. I'll note on the agenda for later is the agreement with the Civil War Museum, which would hopefully provide us with a significant amount of what is now an over $8 million budget if we were to implement the entire Reservoir Park master plan. And if you flip over one more to the next slide, for Public Works, you can see ADA improvements. You can see a variety of things, including some enhancements for MLK design. You see a new allocation, which is for our new vehicle leasing program, all of which are positive things for the city. And I wanted to include, so total is about $6.5 million. I wanted to make it clear that this is part of the reason that we're not spending down all of our fund balance is because we also have to reserve money for the future. Some of the highlights in your budget packet, not here for the public, but in your budget packet is also a capital budget for 2019 and 2020. We gave you 3 years. It's very cursory at this point, but it does include millions of dollars more that we need to plan for, including what we hope will be a new police station for the Harrisburg Police and an eventual migration from their current location here in the Public Safety Building. More money for continued fire station upgrades and fire equipment. And at least $2 million is going to be needed for the IT migration from the mainframe. That study is going to take place this year, and we'll have a firmer number by the end of the year. But that's a significant one. And then, of course, Reservoir Park we've talked about and its costs. Then, if we look at neighborhood services, again, this is the $19 million neighborhood services budget. We're proposing spending about $4.5 million there on capital improvements, which is a pretty extraordinary number. I want to call your attention to a couple of things. We're going to have a slide in a minute related to demolition, but if you look at that list, we are proposing not only $175,000 for a new excavator, and that is the main piece of equipment used by our in-house demo team, but we're also providing an additional $250,000 to outsource a portion of our demolition. We're going to let our in-house team continue doing what it does, continue to be funded in that manner, but we are looking to have an additional $250,000 for outsourcing demolition, and we'll get to a demo list in just a minute. We have not finished our site acquisition for the Public Works facility, but that is in progress and looks to be completed next year. There's some equipment used for some of our paving projects, such as the tack coat trailer and the tar buggy. And then there's a new tractor for mowing the embankment in Riverfront, a equipment shelter temporarily to help house some of our new equipment, and money being allocated for new trucks, especially all the dump trucks with the spreaders and the plows. And if you look at the bottom of that list, you see some of the continuing lease payments that are going to continue on as we finance these projects, and it gives you a sense of why we need to keep reserves so that we can continue to finance some of these projects as we move forward. That's a lot for Public Works. Now, something which City Council has asked for, and which admittedly is a lot for a couple of slides, but you can look at it and you can review it, has been a sort of demolition priority list. And this is something that we can talk about. It's divided between the in-house team, which is our team, and the bid out, which would be the $250,000 that we would outsource in an effort to basically do twice as much demolition as we might otherwise do. I won't read through the whole thing, but you can see that we've got about 10 properties that we're proposing bidding out, and I guess it's about 15 that are, or more that we're proposing doing in-house. And that is the priority list at the moment from our codes department, and we can discuss that further. Obviously, that's subject to change if emergencies come up, but there is a lot of strategic thought and thinking behind it, and we will go into detail when we have our hearings. Another thing which I thought would be useful for the public and for City Council, and something which isn't reflected directly in the budget presentation as much, is our overall sort of paving plan for the city. A lot of our paving plan comes from liquid fuels, which is not part of the general fund or the neighborhood services fund. It comes from grants like the PennDOT multimodal and Impact Harrisburg. It will come from what we hope will be a loan from the Pennsylvania Infrastructure Bank. And these are the various paving projects that we would hope to accomplish in 2018. You know about 3rd Street. That's the main one, which has been sort of pushed back, but will be completed over the course of next year. You've got Dewberry and the Mulberry area around South 3rd Street. You've got 13th Street from Paxton to Berry Hill from 13th to Cameron, Brookwood, Birchfield, Sycamore, and also Industrial Road, which is being entirely repaved and funded by PennDOT, but is all within the city and is a major connective artery. Our in-house paving team is also going to prioritize our alleys in 2018, and some of the equipment is going to help us do that. As you know, we've invested an awful lot of money into new sanitation equipment, and now to temporary shelter and to new employees. Well, we also need to finally upgrade a number of the alleys throughout the city so that they can withstand this larger, heavier equipment. That's an alley list, and along with locations where they are, and we can discuss that further when we have our Public Works hearing. And just generally with regard to the paving summary, we wanted you to know that what is occurring right now is that there is a field survey which is underway to basically assess all of the roads within the city of Harrisburg. That data is then going to help us compile a priority list, and in February of 2018, Wayne believes that we'll be ready to give you a presentation with a long-term paving priority list for the city, and that's sort of big news. The ones that we've prioritized for 2018, we've done in conjunction with CRW as well as in conjunction with UGI, so we're well coordinated at this moment. And then finally, just to let the public know and everyone know that there will be 2 budget hearings coming up on December 12th and December 13th. I should say that on December 12th as well, there's going to be a small presentation on composting, and the public may find that interesting too. And after those hearings, Council has its legislative session scheduled for December 19th to vote on the budget. So thank you all for letting me present those highlights. Look forward to returning and having all the department directors here to take your questions and to dive more deeply into the budget.
You're welcome, Mayor. Thank you very much for the presentation. Certainly we'll be getting those questions to your administration. Moving on to courtesy of the floor. I'm not going to ask questions tonight. Moving on to courtesy of the floor. Anyone to my right, please come to the mic this time, please. Anyone in the middle?
Okay, I noticed, there was a presentation on the budget for the paving plan, and I'm Olivia Peck, 403 Hale Avenue in Harrisburg. I met with Mr. Baltimore, and I had a conversation with Aaron Johnson about the alleys and paving the alleys. And I was told that all of the alleys were going to be paved in 2018. And looking at this presentation, it appears that there is a schedule, and perhaps not all the alleys are going to be paved. So will there be a plan that will be released to the public during the hearings? Or, how will we find out, what is the strategy for getting all the, okay, so no answer to that.
Yes, Mayor.
Well, we did provide a prioritized list of 10 of the alleys that
Right.
are going to be paved. So you could expect those to be the first 10 that our in-house team would get to. I realize that's not every alley within the city of Harrisburg, but it's a place that we need to start. And if you speak afterwards to Dave and Aaron about your specific alley, we can let you know where that falls in the list.
So is there a strategy plan for all the
Yes,
alleys?
the alleys have been prioritized.
Okay.
I don't know where your particular alley is, but we'll tell you where it is in the priority
Okay.
list. And I didn't present every alley in Harrisburg, but we presented the first 10 that we'll pave.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. All righty. I'm not so familiar with this process. So do I get to bring up other topics that haven't been discussed yet at this point?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to mention there was an article in the Berg called "The Landlord Vanishes," and it was very interesting, a little depressing, but basically what it did was kind of lay out the process and what's happening now that we have absentee landlords that are buying properties from out of state, and these folks have learned how to game the system so that they know how to buy properties, make minor repairs. When it reached the point where it's on, certain lists, there's a number of seized, upset sale list, and then I won't go through the whole process. I'm sure you're all aware of it. But the bottom line is, and even Ms. Daniels was quoted, you were interviewed, Councilwoman, I should say, I'm sorry, in this article about the problem with enforcing fines that are allowed now under some ordinance that was passed in 2015. And so you can't measure the effectiveness because it really hasn't been used. So my only point is, I know that you've hired a lobbyist. And so my question is, can this be among the things that the lobbyists will address, since these blighted properties, and then sometime when you even get to tear it down, they just sit as vacant land, and then that accumulates trash, and so from the community standpoint, I think we would like to know that this is an issue that is being addressed, on the legislative level. At least an attempt is being made.
It certainly is.
And we need to kind of get some feedback on that.
Okay.
Thank
And we
you.
will have that feedback for you.
Okay.
Anyone else in the middle? Go ahead, Mr. Butts.
Good evening. I'm Louis Butts. I see a lot of alley work be done. Are we going to increase the number of employees that are hired by the city to get some of this work done? I heard a lot about the comprehensive plan also. Can we ensure that there is an increase in employment amongst our residents with all this goings on? That's the only thing that I'm not hearing. We need, if we're going to be aggressive with projects, we need to be aggressive at hiring our residents for these projects. I don't know if there is something for education within our own residential unit, so we can stay more in-house and make sure that these jobs that we had in-house are in-house. And that's pretty much, I want to make sure that we're being aggressive with hiring people that live within our city also for our city work.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Butts. Anyone else in the middle? Anyone to my left?
Hi, I'm Dave Schuman. What she had just said is I get these flyers through the mail of they'll buy your house as it is. And I called them today. And it is a fact that these are out-of-towners, that these investors that will buy the properties, they will repair them just a little bit and then put tenants in it, okay, and/or buy to sell. It's one thing is we have a real problem here in Harrisburg with the landlords that are not in town. Okay, I won't even say where it is, but they don't clean the properties up. You know, the weeds are growing, and what do we do about that? Okay, so at some point, I think that we need to do some enforcement in order to get this resolved with that. Next thing I'd like to say that I'm really grateful and honored that I went to the Afro-American vets a couple weeks ago, because, you know, it's really is an honor that the Afro-Americans within this state, within this whole country, that have really devoted their time for the United States. And one thing that I did hear from as me, a little older, had said that there's a problem with the generation that's coming up and current and upcoming, that there's no discipline. And we really need to take care of this problem. So thank you for letting me share.
You're welcome, sir. Anyone else to my left?
Excuse me, I forgot one thing. I've been noticing a lot of tree trimmers, a lot of contractors, and I think our citizens can clean up our own trees also, so maybe we need to work on some training to hire some people to clean our own trees instead of having these contractors coming from elsewhere to trim our trees. I've been seeing a lot of them, and that there's nobody, they don't have our faces, they're everywhere, little pockets, and they're doing our trees, but nobody from our city is being hired to do this stuff. It's imperative that we hire our own people. I'm not the only one saying it, and it's kind of redundant for me to say this stuff, and nobody's triggering no training getting our people hired.
Okay.
Now, I'm coming back,
Okay.
and we're gonna proceed with this in a little bit more proactive way, because I see it every day.
Thank you, Mr. Butts.
Can I address that, please?
Yes, you may, Mr. Johnson.
Well, Louis, you know I know y'all all your life. That's not true. You got false information. Number one, our guys trim our trees, the residents' trees, when they request that, first and foremost. If you see a private person out there trimming, that's because that residents called them, because the residents are responsible for their trees, unless it falls in the right-of-way, excuse me, or on the safety issue, then we'll take it down, okay? But other than that, we have a list with senior citizens, which we had money in the budget for that, which we took down, I would say, about 15 trees this year from the senior citizen list, okay? But that's not us out there, okay? But we have our own crew that do our thing, okay? So that's not true. That's not true. That's false information.
I'm just talking about training.
Mr. Butts,
Yeah,
don't want to
no.
get into a confrontation, Mr. Butts.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, no.
it's not a confrontation. You just need to be informed. We won't train anybody. We have our own people that work, that do that kind of thing. That's very competent, you know what I mean, as far as getting that done. But
There's a lot of trees that ain't been done.
Mr. Butts.
it's not our
Mr.
responsibility, though.
Butts.
That's the thing about it. It's
Mr.
not our
Mr. Johnson, Mr. Johnson.
Don't, can you,
Okay,
wait, Mr.
again.
Mr. Major, I have this, please.
Okay.
Mr. Butts, you had an opportunity to speak, and now Mr. Johnson was getting up to inform you what's going on in the city of Harrisburg. So we don't want a confrontation. He's trying to give you information, and you're debating back and forth. We're not going to have that in this council chambers. Mr. Majors.
No, I was just going to echo what Mr. Johnson said. So there are a few different things that he was trying to address. The first is if it's in the right-of-way that the city owns, the city is responsible for trimming those trees. So those are city employees that do that work. If it's a residential neighborhood and it's on my personal property, I have to find a service to do that work. So if we have folks that are going to, city residents that want to learn how to do that trade and work with a landscaper or a tree removal service, they can do that. So we're looking at two different issues, but as to Mr. Johnson's point, if they fall into the right-of-way, the city's responsible, and if it's a quote-unquote street tree that's in the right-of-way that the city's responsible for, it's our city folks that are doing it. If you know some contractors that are willing to work with some of our youth and get them trained up, feel free to reach out. You have all of our contact information so that we can look to address that issue. I know that that's something that's very passionate about you, and all of us want to see city residents hired to do work, but we need to make sure that, as Mr. Johnson said, that you have some of the right information. And
Also, you have PPL.
right, exactly. PPL has to make sure that any power lines are cleared, and they have contractors that they may hire to do that work. So if you can give us an example of where you're seeing it, we may be able to address that more specifically for you.
Thank you, Mr. Majors. Moving on, anyone else to my left? If not, we're moving on with the agenda. Approval of minutes, approval of legislative session minutes of November 14, 2017. Any questions, comments, deletions, corrections, or omissions? Hearing none, minutes will stand as such. Moving on, reports of committees, we have none this evening. Moving on to ordinance for first reading, Bill 13, 2017. Mr. Petrosky, please read that into record.
Bill 13 of 2017 was moved by Mr. Allett, seconded by Mr. Johnson. It's an ordinance establishing the budget for the municipal government of the city of Harrisburg for the year 2018.
That will be placed in Budget and Finance Committee. Moving on to Bill 14.
Bill 14 of 2017 was moved by Mr. Allett, seconded by Mr. Johnson. It's an ordinance amending the codified ordinances of the city of Harrisburg, Title V, Licensing and Taxation, Part 5, Real Estate Taxes, Chapter 5-501, Property Tax by establishing for the year 2018 a tax levy on land and improvements, and providing for the distribution of taxes levied and assessed, and providing for a tax rebate for the difference between the tax due and attributable to the year 2018 tax levy over the tax due and attributable to the year 2006 for tax levy for qualifying senior citizens.
That will be placed in Budget and Finance Committee as well. Moving on to Bill 15, 2017.
Bill 15 of 2017 was moved by Ms. Williams, seconded by Mr. Allett. It's an ordinance to technically amend and update Section 2-307.7 of the codified ordinances of the city related to personnel and to include salary ranges of pay for non-representative exempt management positions within the city of Harrisburg for the 2018 budget year.
That will be placed in Budget and Finance Committee as well. Moving on to ordinance for amendment, we have none. Moving on to ordinance for final passage, we have none. Moving on to resolutions, Resolution 74, 2017.
Resolution 74 of 2017 was moved by Ms. Williams, seconded by Mr. Allett. It's a resolution authorizing the city of Harrisburg to negotiate and enter into a professional services contract with Maverick Strategies for strategic guidance and intelligence gathering for lobbying and related service.
Questions or comments, council members, on Resolution 74?
Just one comment.
Yes, Mr. Allett.
Just wanted to reiterate, I think my colleagues know that I'm in support of this resolution, but going a little bit deeper, when you hire a lobbyist, you're obviously assuming some risk because you're asking for something that could potentially be done, and we're not sure, and we have high hopes that it can be done. But I feel very strongly that this is an important step for us to take. Many of you know over the last few years how strongly I've been kind of pushing back on information coming out on the state, the relationship between the state and the capital city, and things that need to change from a legislative standpoint. And I think this gives us our first kind of foot forward to help achieve some of those objectives. So I'm in strong support of this, and I encourage my colleagues to support this resolution as well.
Thank you, Mr. Allett. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, please call the vote, Mr. Petrosky.
Mr. Allett?
Yes.
Ms. Daniels? No. Ms. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Mattson?
Yes.
Mr. Majors?
Yes.
Ms. Williams?
Yes,
Resolution 74 passes.
thank you. Moving on to Resolution 90.
Resolution 90 of 2017 was moved by Mr. Madsen, seconded by Ms. Williams. It's a resolution approving the Second Amendment to a lease, licensing, and operating agreement between the City of Harrisburg and the National Civil War Museum, modifying provisions to provide for the sale and purchase of city-owned historical collection, providing for the payment of rents to the city, providing for offsets of rents and as a reimbursement for capital expenditures made in the course of operating in the facility, providing for the establishment of both the building reserve fund and funding for the Reservoir Park Master Plan from proceeds of the sale of the historical collection and otherwise resolving the disputes of the parties.
Any questions or comments, council members, on Resolution 90? Mr. Mattson?
I recommend that we approve this resolution. I think it's an important step forward that we continue to have regular communication with folks at Civil War. I personally attend their meetings to make sure that they are fulfilling their goals and doing whatever I can to help them.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, please call the vote.
Mr. Allett?
Yes.
Ms. Daniels?
Yes.
Ms. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Mattson?
Yes.
Mr. Majors?
Yes.
Ms. Williams?
Yes,
Resolution 90 passes.
thank you. Moving on to Resolution 116.
Resolution 116 of 2017 is moved by Mr. Allett, second by Mr. Mattson. It's a resolution approving the seventh proposed 2017 budget reallocation.
And be placed in Budget and Finance Committee. Moving on to old business, council members. Anyone have old business? Mr. Johnson?
I know at the end of the last work session, we kind of briefly talked on the 3rd Street multimodal project, and as far as the participation from MB, WB, and DB. I was wondering if there was like any more follow-up to that, or I know at first Mary wasn't kind of apprised to it.
Wayne is here and can speak to you. I don't know if we have anything to add to what we already emailed, but if you think it's important for the public to get that, I'd be happy to have him come up and address that.
Yeah, I think the biggest portion is today I kind of spent time and was able to kind of really kind of process like some of the information that was sent over from our engineering department in regards to the different solicitations that were made by the general contractor on there, and kind of looking at you know, who was contacted and what realms of their services they provide, and you know how that list. So one thing I'm kind of overall like disappointed in is I think overall we have for the city. I guess Jackie's not here, she left, but we have an MBWB, you know, MB type of document that lists all of the contractors that are kind of currently registered inside the city, with lists like their different, you know, fields that they do and that they participate in. And then, you know, even on the general contractor who were soliciting different MBWs and DBs, you know, it seemed like some contractors on that list weren't even sent solicitation. Some were. I don't know what made, you know, some of the processes as far as, you know, the services they're able to provide and, you know, the services that we were looking for this project. But for us to be at such a low percentage at this time, and, you know, we have our own certified list, and we're not reaching out to people who perform these works on this list, is kind of, you know, I don't understand how we're at that point.
Mr. Martin, would you like to speak on that?
I would.
Like, do we recommend the people, or does that?
So, with highway projects, I mean, our list is great for CDBG funding, but if you go through that list, I think there's only like one contractor, Washington Dowling, that does the type of work that we're talking about with a streetscape project. And we have used, or this Washington Dowling they're from York, they're an MBE, and they do a lot of ADA ramps. There might be one other one, I'm not sure, I haven't looked at that list in a while. But, you know, we don't need interior painters, carpet layers, we don't need that kind of work. So if you start taking out all those skill sets, you're left with a very small list. So what these contractors do is they search the federal lists for local contractors, which we would recognize their certifications as well. And so that's how they reached out, in particular on the 3rd Street, they reached out to 20 contractors. None were on the city's list, they were all from the federal database.
Well, some of them are on the city's list. So like for like the electrical components, there was like 2 different ones that were pulled off from the electrical list. That's with ours. There was someone out in Harrisburg and someone out of Stilton, and even Washington Dowling, the company you mentioned, they weren't sending solicitations, you know, from the from the GC of the project.
Well, the problem with this GC is that's the work he does, so he's not gonna sub out the only work. I mean, he's a concrete prime is what he is. So you might have like a Rogel or a Pensy, for example, that does paving, and they'll look to sub out their concrete work, they'll look to sub out the electrical, they'll look to sub out the landscaping or what have you. But the bidder, the low bidder on this job, that's their work.
But even inside his leather, so I understand that standpoint, but, so his leather that he sent out is conceiving, because it will say he's looking, like it says he's looking for contractors for bids for concrete work. So I understand that's his kind of framework of work he does. I think he was looking for, traffic control, electrical, concrete. Concrete is one of them. So he's not really looking for concrete work if he's putting it out there that it's not something that he's going to subcontract.
Well, I mean, if that's the question, why wasn't Washington Dowling solicited for concrete work? I can certainly find, if they were soliciting other contractors, I can certainly find out the answer to that question.
And it seems like, and like out of the, so probably like six people on the list were kind of focused more on like landscape, and I know there's a lot of
Tree
green
plantings.
infrastructure into it, but as far as it being like a $5 million project, and we have these participation goals, we only know landscaping is not going to get you to that participation percentage.
That's a third of the project cost is landscaping.
Is it?
Yeah, because there's a 2-year, and this came up with some of the solicitations, was there's a 2-year warranty built
I
into
read
the
that online.
contract on a solicitation, and these smaller firms don't want to take on a 2-year maintenance obligation of, 300 trees in a city. And that's CRW. I mean, they did they're funding that portion of the project, and we probably should really have a conversation with them, because that was a sticking point for the small business. I shouldn't say small business, but they tend to be smaller businesses, the disadvantaged businesses.
Mm-hmm. I just feel, I'm sorry I would kind of just keep leaning onto it, but I feel like as far as, us as a city, having these goals and just knowing that these major projects are going to be coming down the pipeline, we have to what, I want to see as a city council and what residents will want to see is when these projects are going on, that, it leads down to trickle-down effect where it can be actually, residents of the city working on these projects and taking part of it. So
But please don't confuse minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses with local participation, because we don't have a local business participation. So a lot of times we're reaching out all the way to Philly to get women and minority-owned businesses to come and work in the city, just to meet the city's goals, because we're not doing a local requirement. And so we may be turning away local businesses by encouraging these prime contractors to reach out all the way out to Philadelphia. And I did, well, with the recommendation of our business administrator, I did pull together our department's expenditures over so far in 2014. And so of the $5 million, which most of it is this project, for public works construction, these are the 5 categories in our ordinance. Public works construction, equipment purchases and rentals, materials and supplies, just general services, like that'd be painting, maintenance services, and then professional services. So the public works construction, primarily because of the Third Street project, has been driven down. There's a 15% goal. We're at 2%, which is what the Third Street project, what we're at right now in the Third Street project. The WBE participation is at 10%, which is past the 2% goal. Equipment purchases, really low in MBE. There's a traffic signal supplier that we get a lot of traffic signal equipment from, and that's primarily what we buy. 75% women-owned business participation. Two suppliers. Materials and supplies, we have low, essentially 0 MBE participation with a 10% goal. But WB, a 5% goal, and we have 56% participation. Services, we have 0, and a lot of that's specialty work, traffic signal knockdowns and stuff. And then professional services, primarily because of the sinkhole project, we have a 64% MB participation in professional service agreements and a 3% WB participation in professional service agreements. Those agreements tend to be easier to get us the participation levels because we actually negotiate those. But in a low bid situation, we're just asking that they meet solicitation requirements. And so we can require them to solicit every single person on that list, our list. And if we missed Washington Valley, that's on me because I didn't, I should have made them, write that solicitation, or we could have wrote it in the bid package. But, so I just wanted to share that with you.
Do you think it's about building, and a lot of the burden, and I know Wes expresses through email, a lot of the burden is not on you. You see what I'm saying? As far as, trying to connect with these different, subcontractor and business. I think it's also a portion of economic development of, compiling these lists. So when these projects are rolling out, it's more or less, we have the contacts. This is our general contractor. Boom, this is a good reference point to kind of look for the services that we need for this project. So I think, I know it needs to be a lot bigger conversation as far as, making sure we have the most robust list for the different things that we're looking to do, especially, we're planning right now for things of the future. We know certain projects is going to take place. So how can we make sure that we're doing all we can to kind of reach out to these different MB, WBs, and DBEs? So when we are doing these bid packages, Wayne can easily refer them to say, like, here's the list, here are the people, boom. I think I just know just as far as, the way the Third Street project rolled out, our, economic development department, they weren't part of this process. It was more kind of, it worked in like a silo, and something like this, it cannot work in a silo. It has to work together. And I mean, if anyone else has anything to add, I'm done.
Mr. Majors?
So the one thing that I'll just add is when we are looking to do professional services and a lot of other things, we pull folks not just from our local area. We've been pulling folks from, Indiana and Texas and whatever. So what I'm asking, and it's on our economic development, it's on the city as a whole, is we have these goals. We have to work increasingly harder to achieve those goals. It may be difficult, but we need to do that because we have, like, for instance, when we did the pool study, the gentleman was from Texas, I believe. His company is a large company that does projects all over the place, and they may be an expert, but we pulled them from out of state to come in and assist with the project. We had a guy from Allentown, and he pulled someone from Texas. So there are people that are specialized, that are MBEs, WBEs, all over the country. If we're willing to pull them in to do a project, help us with a study here, we should be able to work with MBEs, WBEs, throughout, the country that may have certain specialties that we may not be able to pull from, but even on our contract, and we can just try harder to reach these goals. And I know I'll speak for myself, is we're going to be pushing the city to reach those goals. At some point, we may have to say, hey, if you're not reaching the goals, we may have to look at what someone mentioned before, that at the federal level, if folks aren't reaching goals, they pull contracts. So we can work to make sure that people are taking our goals that we have and set for ourselves in the city of Harrisburg in terms of MB participation seriously. I know we may not be able to hit them on every project, but if we can show at least council or the public that, hey, we tried, and this project may not have hit that goal, but we're going to continue to work in a positive way to hit these goals. That's one thing that I know, speaking for myself as one member of council, that we want to see that as a goal for the city of Harrisburg.
But please keep in mind, we had 64, in professional services, we had 64 participation MBE, right. 64 out of over $2.1 million.
Right.
And then another 3% in WB.
Right.
So professional services isn't the problem. It's a low bid.
Okay.
We have to accept low bid. And all we can require them to do is solicit. And you have to, Could we have spent $10 million and got 100%, or not 100%, but met these goals? Yeah, we definitely
Right.
could have, but you can't legally accept
Right.
a high bid
Okay.
because they meet a goal.
And I understand that,
And-
so,
And the other thing is, okay, Doug Lamb Construction, who won the Third Street project, is a Lancaster-based company. The majority of his employees are minorities, but he gets zero credit for that. And they're local residents. So for us to advocate to hire someone from Baltimore to come in with zero local residents, I mean, is that what you want to
Well,
accomplish?
and-
I just
and-
want to make sure that
okay.
we're going in the right direction.
again-
Because that seems very counterintuitive
Okay.
from the statements that are
so,
being made.
and again, and I'm not trying to make this a combative thing. So that information you're providing me is new information to me. If you're able to give us some of that information, we know, okay, that this construction company, while it may not be an MBE, it is hiring local folks. Those kind of things play into our thinking. But if I just see this contractor wins that award, then I don't know that information. So we need to make sure that there's a flow of information, that we do, that, you know, we're going to get those monthly working reports, so we see that if there's local folks that are working, you know, if they're minorities or not. I mean, right now, it's what we tend to have a struggle within cities is having some more of that communication. And I hope that through some of the things that we're seeing in the budget, we'll have better communication. I think that with the adding of the business administrator, just in these few short months, I can speak for myself that the communication that I've received back and forth has been a little bit better, and we're working on a communication plan between council and the administration. So if we can see these things and they're tangible to us, then it makes more sense. But when all you do is get the information, you see a 2% participation rate, it raises a flag for me. So we want to make sure that we're hitting and achieving and exceeding those goals. Hitting above the goal is great. And additional, we have a lot of capital projects that are coming to our area. So that's why I think Councilman Johnson is adamant about this now, because if we don't nip it in, if we don't look at this and try to address it now, when we have $20 million projects, $30 million, $40, $50 million projects, the Tiger Grant potentially having a bridge over Division Street, and we don't look at this project right here now, and if it slips underneath us now, who's telling, you know, what will happen in the future? So that's at least for me, that's where I'm coming from. We want to make sure that we're working to achieve and exceed all those goals.
Okay. And Mr. Johnson?
And just another thing to add, like what I spent time doing today, I spent time actually calling some of the subcontractors that he reached out to. And one thing too we have to realize is just within this system, with a lot of different scopes of projects that are people are reaching out to subcontracts to, you know, solicitations, you know, we don't. I guess it's hard to define what solicitation means. You know, some of them were actually mailed, some of them were faxed. So a lot of times, you know, when we're looking at, and like I said, I think this is more of an economic development piece as well too. When we're looking at like these small businesses who are really receiving, like, you know, numerous solicitations, whether local or, you know, whatever it may be, you know, a lot of times if it's not that, you know, that personal touch of saying like, hey, this is what's going on, it takes time and preparation to prepare to the quotes and the bids, you know, to feel like you have a chance of getting selected. You see what I'm saying? Like, let's just say if I was a concrete company and Doug Lamb was looking for subcontractors, but knowing that I'm probably going to do all the contract work, and I prepared the time and the bid documents to submit towards Doug Lamb, he fulfilled his requirement as a solicitation requirement, but I just wasted my time as a subcontractor. You see what I'm saying? So we have to kind of get like a realistic perspective of building those relationships with, you know, these small businesses. You know, and I do think there's a certain essence of it where it definitely should start locally, you know, for sure, because that's going to mean more to, you know, this area and to the city. But I think a lot of times, you know, people are just, you know what the game is. You know, hey, I got my solicitation requirements. No one's, you know, I didn't get any responses back. I write my letter and say, hey, I solicited this area, you know, these type of projects. There's not a lot of people do this type of work. Boom, I'm off to the running. So we have to kind of,
There's some things we could do. We could hold mandatory pre-bid conferences where we invite the minority businesses and make it mandatory for the primes, you know, the primes that are bidding. I mean, there are certain things we could do. It's sort of a learning experience. I mean, I was disappointed. I mean, we were not expecting a 15% participation because we've had a lot of difficulty reaching that on these pavement projects because a lot of the money's going into asphalt, in-person asphalt. But I was expecting to see something in the 8 or 9%. And so to see a 2.5%, we were very disappointed, and we had a long conversation about whether or not to reject all bids and try again. But, you know, there's grant funding in place, and there's a timeline, and
you just gave a perfect example of something that is us taking just another step forward. Something as simple as having that pre-bid meeting could have got additional solicitation from the area. So these are the things we're talking about. Everything doesn't necessarily have to be an ordinance change or anything, but again, that's us as a city taking that little bit further step of making that solicitation. You make the solicitation, and then we say, hey, we're going to hold a pre-bid meeting, and again, invite more people. Now, if we still don't hit those things that we're doing, we're working harder to achieve them, that's one thing. But again, on this project, it definitely was brought to our attention, and we want to make sure that, like I said, we have a lot of projects that we're looking to do, a lot of money that we want to invest back into the city of Harrisburg, and we just want to make sure that those steps are being taken to do that. So if it's a learning experience, and we're going to make sure we're doing pre-bid conferences moving forward, that's a step in the right direction, and we just need to take more of those kind of steps.
Understood.
Okay.
Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you.
Any other old business, council members? Any new business? Mr. Allett?
Just a reminder to remind everybody, as the mayor mentioned, we will have budget hearings that will take place on December 12th and December 13th here in council chambers. For my colleagues on council, as you review the budget and simulate your questions, please send them to Kirk by December 5th so we can get them over to the administration in time for the budget hearings.
Any other new business? Mr. Majors?
Hold on, I want to make sure I have this right. Okay, so in addition, we'll be adding Resolution 115, 2017 to our work session for the 5th. I believe that's to discuss issues relating to the acquisition of property. So that'll be on our agenda for our December 5th work session.
Okay. Any other new business? Okay. Hearing none, I get a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Have a second? Second. Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.